Nurse Jane worked at the children's hospital for a very long time. Most days were normal and not too exciting, but one day, while she was checking on the babies, she noticed a newborn. What was unusual was that nobody had come to visit the baby for days. She was surprised by what she learned next. Jane did everything she could to find the baby's real mom, and she finally succeeded with some help from the police. However, the mom was not what Jane expected, and she told Jane a surprising reason for leaving the baby. Jane worked at the children's hospital for a long time, even though she didn't have kids of her own. She loved her job and being with children. One day, while checking the pediatric ward, she noticed something unusual. There was a baby in a crib all by itself, wrapped in a towel. Normally, this was normal in the pediatric ward, but this time, it felt strange to Jane. She learned that the baby came to the hospital through an emergency call. Someone called 911 anonymously and said they left the baby in a park to be found. That's how the baby got to the hospital, and nobody had visited him. Jane was surprised and went to check on the baby to see how he was doing. She couldn't understand why someone would leave such a sweet baby in a park like that. As the days passed, there was still no word from the baby's parents, and no visitors came to see him. Jane continued to care for the baby, recognizing the importance of physical touch and affection, especially for newborns. She was determined to find a suitable family member or guardian for the baby, although she didn't know where to begin. Thankfully, the police also became involved shortly after discovering the baby. They initiated an investigation to uncover the identity of the anonymous caller who had used a public payphone. Tracing the call back to its source was challenging due to the nature of the phone, but they gathered other clues that might lead them to the caller. Although there were no security cameras in the park where the baby had been left, the police managed to review the footage from the payphone and its surroundings. They identified a man carrying the same basket that had held the baby. However, they couldn't determine his identity or trace his movements before or after the call, since not all streets had surveillance cameras. The man who abandoned the baby was homeless, evident from his disheveled appearance and tattered clothing. The security footage depicted him approaching various individuals, presumably seeking assistance in the form of money or food. The police couldn't confirm whether he was the baby's father, but they believed locating him might provide valuable answers. Meanwhile, Nurse Jane continued caring for the baby. She made sure he ate, slept, and stayed warm. However, the police still couldn't find the man who left the baby. Feeling desperate, Jane decided to take action. She began going to the park where the baby was discovered every day. Weeks passed, and the police had given up searching for the man. The hospital wanted to place the baby in foster care, which worried Jane. In her free time, Jane searched everywhere she could think of but found no leads. Then, one day, she walked past a soup kitchen and saw the same man from the security footage waiting in line. Jane approached the man cautiously, introducing herself. He seemed uncomfortable and hesitant to talk, but she persisted. Eventually, he started answering her questions. Jane learned that he wasn't the baby's father. He had been homeless for a few years after losing his job and home. One day, he saw a woman sitting on a bench in the same park where he had left the baby. She was crying and holding the baby, appearing very upset. She approached him, tears in her eyes, and asked, "Can you take care of my baby?" Before he could react, she handed him the basket with the baby and said, "Please, take care of my baby," then ran away. He was left with the baby and the basket, so he called 911, hoping to give the baby a chance for a better future. Jane understood and agreed that he had made the right decision. Jane had always believed in the kindness of strangers. She couldn't bear the thought of that tiny innocent soul left alone in the world without a story, without an identity. "Who are you, little one?" The next day, a local soup kitchen brought her face to face with Paul, a wise homeless man who seemed to have stories etched into his wrinkles. Over a warm bowl of stew, Jane cautiously broached the topic of the baby. Paul's guarded eyes flickered with recognition. She came around a few times. Paul began hesitantly. "Her name was Amy, I think." He'd scratched his grizzled beard. A kind soul, despite the rough edges. She often spoke of a new start, hope, a future for her baby. Jane's heart raced. Could this be a lead? Through covert discussions with Dr. Jason and her own ventures into the city's forgotten nooks, the picture started forming. Amy, it seemed, had been a regular in many homeless shelters, always on the move. She used to work at that old bookstore on Elm Street, Jason shared. Having spoken with an old colleague, a picture of Amy began to form in Jane's mind. a woman with dreams and ambitions but trapped by circumstances, trying her best for her unborn child. With a list of potential places, Jane set out intent on retracing Amy's steps. Jane's persistence paid off when she chanced upon Margaret, a social worker. Amy, she pondered, yes, there's a shelter, Willow Haven, a refuge for women like her. The blue door of Willow Haven welcomed Jane. Here, Amy had briefly found sanctuary from the tempest of her life. In the common room of Willow Haven, Amy sat frail yet fiery. As Jane approached, their eyes met, a myriad of emotions passing between them. Recognition, surprise, apprehension. Amy, Jane whispered, extending a hand. I know about your baby, she added gently. Amy's eyes, pools of sadness and hope, brimmed with tears. With a deep breath, Amy began her tale. She spoke of dreams crushed, trust shattered, and her undying love for the baby she couldn't keep. I wanted the best for him, she murmured, her voice shaking. Jane felt empathy and admiration for Amy, who had endured so much for love. Amy acknowledged Jane's offer of help, expressing gratitude mixed with pride. She realized that accepting assistance was a sign of strength. As time passed, Jane provided unwavering support to Amy. Amy attended counseling sessions to address her past traumas and found temporary housing in a shared community, taking small steps toward rebuilding her life. Jane dedicated hours to legal matters, discussing guardianship and rights with lawyers, navigating forms, court procedures, and child welfare meetings. During quiet nights, Jane reflected on her actions, wondering if she had crossed any boundaries or if her connection with Jacob was overshadowing Amy's bond with him. Jane's friends, sensing her inner conflict, gathered over coffee, sharing stories of fostering, guardianship, and adoption. Jane, although feeling uncertain, clung to her notes. In her room's solitude, amid the city's faint sounds, Amy contemplated the idea of adoption. She pondered whether she could handle it and if it would genuinely be the best choice for Jacob. One rainy day, Amy and Jane sat across from each other. Amy, her voice trembling, began, Jane, I've been thinking about Jacob's future. As she shared her thoughts, it became clear that Amy believed Jane might offer Jacob something she currently couldn't. The room was filled with tears and understanding, marking the beginning of a new chapter. The adoption journey was like a ride with lots of different feelings. Both women felt happiness, worry, hope, and fear. As time passed, they filled out papers, had people check their homes, and thought deeply about things. All of this was getting them ready to make a big decision. Every time they signed a paper or put a stamp on something, they felt closer to making Jacob officially part of their family. The legal stuff was tricky, but Jane was determined, and her lawyer helped a lot. They felt the warmth of their new relationship as mother and son. Their home became a happy place with lots of fun, toys, and most importantly, love. It was the start of their journey together, which had some tough parts, but also brought them lots of happiness. As the years went by, Jane often thought about how lucky they were. It all began with the chance meeting at the hospital, and now they had a strong and loving bond with Jacob. Their stories show that sometimes life brings unexpected surprises that lead to beautiful connections.